Actually, the whole country was naive about what was about to happen to us. Nobody thought that we needed to worry about what was going on in Europe. Did you ever read a book called Europe in the Spring? I think it was written by Pearl Buck. I could be wrong. But it was about Europe the spring before the war started. Yeah. And up until then, every family thought that they should take their kids to Europe at least once for one summer. And when this broke out, all of a sudden, all of these, because people didn't travel on airplanes much, these ocean liners came back with all the people that had been in Europe. And at one point, down on the, on the Hudson River there, where those piers are, there, all of them were there. The Queen Mary, the Queen Elizabeth, the Normandy, I've kind of forgotten some of the other things, but there were like 10 of these mammoth all moored there at the same time, because they all, just set sail with all these people that had been vacationing all summer in Europe. Suddenly they got scared. And they used to have, particularly out in the West, they were always having these peace meetings. And my father who had been in World War I, used to say, this is the silliest thing. Don't they know these people are spies that are putting these things on? They don't want us to come over and help out the Allies the way we did last time. They want us to stay here. So they are trying to make us isolationists. And we're not going over there. We're not going to fight that war. We didn't have enough armaments. We didn't have enough soldiers. I mean, when we finally got into the war, it was unreal how badly prepared we were. I was really quite young when he was talking that the next war would be very different. It would be much more of a naval and an air war, because they had invented aircraft carriers. And these, Doolittle's men had to, Jimmy Doolittle was also a friend of Dad's, they had to practice to go on that raid, because they hadn't been taught yet how to land on an aircraft carrier. And the carriers weren't as long as they are now. That, and of course that's the way Pearl Harbor was possible. But when Pearl Harbor came, I can't tell you how many people were saying, oh my gosh, they bombed Pearl Harbor. Where's Pearl Harbor? They never heard of it, half the people. I went to Marymount College for 2 years, and I was at a play that was being given, a Christmas play that was being given in the high school. And my cousin Nancy was in the high school, and she had the lead in the play, and we were there. And when we came out of the play, they told us about it. And Dad had a Pierce Arrow, and he was very proud of it. It was a roadster, very swishy thing, and he was always polishing it. He was out polishing the car, and Mother heard this on the radio, and she came out and she said, Dick, they bombed Pearl Harbor. And Dad said, oh. And Mother said, isn't that in Hawaii? And Dad said, yeah. And she said, well, how did they do that? And Dad put the rag down, and he said, my dear girl, haven't you listened to what I've been saying? They did it with aircraft carriers. You see, you knew that there was a bad war because all the merchant ships were being sunk by the submarines. And particularly in West Hampton, you'd walk on the beach and it was just littered with glop oil and stuff. And at the bottom of the steps going down to the beach at the club they kept a rag and some cleaning fluid for you to clean your feet off so that you didn't bring all that stuff up into the, onto the main part of the clubhouse. And, but the thing is that what you didn't talk about much was that for all of that that you saw lying around on the beach, lives were lost. And they soon figured out that the reflection of the big cities on this Boston to Washington corridor was silhouetting these merchant ships and making it easier for the submarines to torpedo them. So we were all blacked out for about, I don't know, maybe 30 miles inland. Just a little cross in the bottom of every street light and on every headlight in your car. And that was it. And you had, blackout curtains, and all the men that were like my father's age by that time, they were air wardens, and they policed the neighborhoods, and to make sure there were no inadvertent blackout curtains that weren't closed and stuff, and in case there was any spies running around or something that didn't look right. And they had a regular routine. Everybody had a certain night and day, schedule that they were supposed to be out there doing that. All during the war, there were things that came along that gave you courage not to get too discouraged about how things were. And the thing about Pearl Harbor was that somehow or other God or somebody sent our aircraft carriers out for maneuvers so they didn't get them. And on the way back, there was a movie not too long ago about the Japanese point of the thing, or I guess it was showing both sides or something. And Yamamoto said to, when all the sailors on the aircraft carriers were so excited and celebrating and everything, he said, "You can just stop your celebrating. We haven't accomplished anything. All we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant." And which was true, because we still had our aircraft carriers. And even though the first, I don't know, maybe first 8 or 9 months or a year, it was just fall back and baton and corregidor and sit down corregidor underneath that thing there, and then they took MacArthur off, and that was, you just felt like, oh gosh, now what? And it was so exciting when he finally came back to Leyte Gulf and landed there. It just made us all feel like, we weren't going to be invaded. In England, they had already discovered that they needed every man to fight. Who was fit to fight had to be fighting, not driving cars and things that other people could do. And so their women were driving, and they had I don't remember now what they called them, but like Churchill's daughter Mary, she was his driver. And you remember there was this thing about Eisenhower and his driver. And so the minute we got into the war, they formed the British American Ambulance Corps. And because, you see, they were so busy manufacturing things that you needed to fight the war, that they weren't spending any time on ambulances. So somebody discovered that there were, in Toledo and Detroit, there were a lot of truck chassis that never got to be used. So we went out and brought these chassis back, and we drive 2 at a time, and like a 6-wheel thing, and just a boxy thing to sit on and a windshield. And that was it, driving these things. And
how old were you?
22. And then they'd put the bodies on them. See, that company, Rotors there, they made the bodies, and that's a 6-stretcher desert ambulance. And those went to North Africa. And they got a lot of companies to buy them in memory of people. That's how they paid for them. So the deal was, if there was space on a ship going over to North Africa with munitions and war materials, if they had space, they'd call us, and we'd hop in those things and get there as fast as we could. And we'd go to Mobile and New Orleans and Halifax and so forth. Somehow or other, we always went to Halifax in the winter in desert ambulances, but it was a job that normally they would have had men doing, you see. And it was kind of unusual in those days for women to be driving around at all hours of the night and day, driving these big trucks. And
where did you stay at night when you traveled?
Wherever we could find a hotel that had some room. And the hardest thing was finding space on a train to get back after we dropped the ambulances off. We go to Norfolk was very hard because, you see, Norfolk was a regular base, and they had, everybody in Norfolk practically had special passes. So, and you had ID, which designated where you fit in the thing. If you were just a person, you were sort of on the back of the line in case there was something left. If you were in the service, you were head of the line. And we were sort of in the middle when they were Coast Guard passes, you see, that they'd been all checked out as to what we were, and we weren't saboteurs or anything like that. One time we were in New Orleans and coming back, and there were 3 of us, and we were standing in line, and there was an Army major who was behind us. And so we get up then. All they have is an upper. Well, that's not going to help 3 of us very much. And we said, oh, well, we don't want it just one. And he said, he tapped us and he said, take it. And we said, how can we do that with the 3 of us? And he said, I have a compartment. And you can ride in the compartment and sleep there, and I'll go sleep in the upper. We'll have a great time. So we go back to New York with it. We played bridge and had a great time. We had Army beige whipcord overcoats that were stunning, double pleated in the back, and really good looking. They were designed by Knox the Hatter, and he designed you see how pretty that hat, the cap is, soft and pretty. It's not, and we looked great in them. And they were this beautiful RAF blue. And I always remember one day we were in the Gray Bar building, was our headquarters. We're walking through Grand Central Station, about 4 of us, 4 abreast, walking through to go to this party. And you would have thought we were in a movie or something. Practically everybody stops and they're looking at us, and people were always wondering, what are you? If you went to Halifax, any bar you went into, there was every kind of uniform you could imagine. In order to foil the U-boats, the boats, before they crossed over, they went to Halifax. They went up to Halifax, and they made a convoy out of it. And they were protected on 2 sides by naval boats cruisers and battleships and all kinds of stuff. And the merchant ships were in the middle. And this great armada would go across, and that was the only way they could be sure that as much of the stuff that we worked hard to send to Europe would get there. And the U-boats, you see, but they couldn't get at them because they had radar. And so they had after they figured this thing out, but that's where they met and formed the convoys up there. So, you know, the merchant ships from Russia and England and all of those. Lots of ferries you took. And when you went to Norfolk, you took a lot of ferries. There weren't all the bridges and highways that we have today. Although one time I had to, I took 3 trips in one day to Philadelphia. So, you know, we'd sit there in the Gray Bar building and wait till there was something that needed to go. Sometimes they'd say, well, we've got room for 4. And so 4 of us would go. And many times they'd send 1 extra so that we could, you know, that if you had extra, you could keep going all day. We didn't get salary, but we were completely taken care of and clothed in these uniforms. The uniforms really were very good looking, although somebody said to me one time, I can't believe you didn't save your uniform. You know, I wore it for like 3 years, and I'd go to parties and other women were in these nice dresses with veils on their hats and stuff, and I'm in this thing, and I got kind of tired of it. Oftentimes we'd bring an ambulance home. I had forgotten about it, but at my 85th birthday party, Bobby Keeshan reminded me that one time I picked her up in New York and gave her a lift home in the ambulance. But if we were going someplace the next day, instead of having to go to Brooklyn to get the ambulance, if we were in Brooklyn, it was easier to get it the day before and just take it home. We were doing the job that men normally would have done and in previous wars would have done. But when we sort of, I guess, maybe showed them that you women could do these things. So then they started having waves and wax. And once they got them trained, they did it. So they didn't need us anymore. At one point, there was a great deal of discussion about they were going to send us to North Africa to drive between the army hospitals and the base hospitals. And they even took the trouble to teach us celestial navigation at the planetarium so we wouldn't get lost on the desert. And we knew 55 navigational stars, and we could solve the astronomical triangle and spherical trig and all this stuff. And we were studying with the 90-day wonders at the Prairie State. And then when they decided, we used to laugh about it, and some of our boyfriends laughed about it, said, well, you know, the State Department decided they didn't want 21 pretty girls from Westchester in North Africa. They had enough trouble, they didn't want you there. So anyway, we were disbanded at that point. And that was, I don't know, sometime in the middle of the war. And so we all found other things to do. One of the girls was bringing in planes at LaGuardia, you know, the person that stands there going like this to the pilot to bring the plane here. Well, she was doing that. You see, I was fresh out of college, and I had been a math major, so I knew spherical trig without any too much trouble. And they'd have us doing a day's run, and I was always about the 3rd or 4th one up, and a girl. To turn my paper in, the admiral who was running it said, you better go back and look your thing over. Okay, so I go back and look. No, it's fine. I give it. So sometime after we were disbanded, I got a call from them. How would I like to help sort of tutor some of these prairie state 90-day wonders that were having trouble with navigation, it would be a big help. So it was volunteer, but I did it, and it was sort of fun because they were always surprised that it was a girl who was actually showing them what to do. Then I taught sailing at Manhasset Bay Yacht Club junior sailing program. And the other thing that a couple of us did was that, well, they had these war bond drives about every 4 or 5 times a year to raise money for the war. And these war bond drives that's what kept the war going. They had these war bonds. And everybody had a quota. And a lot of the men bought their bonds in New York at their office. So I came up with the idea that, well, maybe if we could lure them into buying their bonds here and made it easy for them, they would do that. I had 2 uniforms, and I took all the buttons off and put new buttons on them, and we wore my ambulance corps uniforms, and we had a great big thing like a dress box with everything we needed to, write down what we needed. And they told us what they wanted on their war bonds, and the next day we'd go up to the bank afterwards and get the bonds, and the next day we'd deliver them to them. And I always remember one man, the train is just coming into the station, and I explained to him that we have a quota too. And Larchmont wants to be proud of the fact that of their contribution. And if all the men buy their bonds in the city, it doesn't help us. And those days, you had steps going up to the train instead of going on level. So the train is about to pull out, and he stepped up on a step, and he says, "You're right. Will you be here tomorrow?" And but those war bond things that we did, they called us the Minute Maids. We made about 1/5 to 1/4 of the quota, Larchmont's quota, by being down there during those drives from 7 to 9. Pretty soon, a lot of communities were picking up on that, but we were the first one to do it, and it was such a surprise to all of us that we had done that well that it was, something markedly noticeable. Yeah.
Is that how you met Kay Cullen?
No, I knew her before. She and I decided to do this together, and we were great friends. We were sailing buddies, and we sailed and crewed on internationals, usually different ones.
What kind of a person was Kay?
Well, I don't want to say she was frivolous. She was very pretty, and her hair was very blonde. And we made a fun couple because I was very dark. I had very dark hair, and she was very blonde, and we're about the same size.
Do you ever keep in touch with Kay Cullen after you separated out?
Well, she joined the Red Cross, what did they call them? Well, they were hostesses. They ran parties and did things like that.
The USO.
Right, that type thing. But it was, and another girl who was Priscilla Shepard, who was also in the ambulance corps with us, went and did that too. And she wanted me to do it, but I don't know, I just didn't want to do it. She just was possessed to go overseas. And I was surprised that she kept on, wanting to do this, because frankly, when I thought we were going to North Africa, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, this is just a dirty place and everything. Why am I going to do this? But I wouldn't have chickened out, but I wasn't sure that was what I wanted to do at all.
Do you remember where you were were when you'd heard that Kay Cullen had been killed, and was that a surprise?
Oh, yeah,
Didn't expect
because she
that.
wasn't supposed to be anywhere. Those girls weren't supposed to be anywhere near the front. But you see, it was the Battle of the Bulge. And you know what, to me, is absolutely amazing? You mentioned that to people, and I'm trying to think where it was that I mentioned this, and somebody said to me, oh, and I said, well, you've heard about the Battle of the Bulge? Oh, yeah, I guess so. I mean, that was just the worst, bloodiest battle of the war. And half of the generation today have never heard of it.
There were so few opportunities really for women. You could go into a factory and become Rosie the Riveter.
Right.
You could drive an ambulance to wherever they needed you. When that program ended, the only other thing you could do was to be an entertainer.
That's right.
By that
Yeah.
I mean a greeter
Yeah.
and provider
Right.
of some comfort.
Yes,
some of
right.
These rest and recreation
Yeah,
places.
exactly. That's what she was doing.
In Manhattan, I suspect.
No, she was in Europe.
But she must have started in the States, I would think.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I'm not
Just
too
over
sure how she did that, but I mean, but she was overseas. She was in England for a while. Oh, yes, I sent, and I was always sending her boxes and things,
Care
and
packages?
yeah, shoe boxes with as much cosmetics as you could put in them,
Nylon stockings.
we had no nylon stockings
So did
to
you
send to
send anything
anybody.
like that?
No, we didn't have. There were no nylon stockings.
It
If
was
the
an
black
addition to the
market,
war, right?
yeah, no, they were invented before that, but they made parachutes out of them, and so they didn't have. We had stockings. Remember this girl Priscilla Shepherd used to say. They were made out of rayon. And so you did, if you wanted to look nice, don't sit down because you've got knees in them. And we didn't wear, except in the dead of winter, any kind of stockings in the ambulance corps. We wore gaiters that came up to here and laced. They were felt. Sometimes after these parties at these fancy hostesses, we'd corral a bunch of New Zealanders and South Africans and stuff in these snappy uniforms and take them to the Stork Club. And Billingsley was always very glad to see us, so he never charged us anything, so it was free fun. And we'd pull up in front of there with the ambulance, and the doorman, he knew us, and out would come all these soldiers from the back. These were 6-stretcher ambulances. Sometimes after these parties at these fancy hostesses, we'd corral a bunch of New Zealanders and South Africans and stuff in these snappy uniforms and take them to the Stork Club. And Billingsley was always very glad to see us, so he never charged us anything, so it was free fun. And we'd pull up in front of there with the ambulance, and the doorman, he knew us, and out would come all these soldiers from the back. These were 6-stretcher ambulances. There were a bunch of Norwegians that had been caught over. They were college kids, and we were college age, you know. And they'd been trapped over here when Norway was invaded, and so they were staying at the yacht club, and they were great fun. And they were waiting for something, some kind of, they wanted to get into an air branch of the British Air Corps that was Norwegian. And they were waiting for this to get formed. So they were there, and they were great sailors. And there was really quite a good group, because before we actually were in the war, and a lot of people who were sailors, like Slim, my husband, he wanted to get in the Navy, so, and he figured it's just a matter of time. So before they drafted him, because he was divorced, so he was, you know, good pickings for the Army, and but he had never gone to college, and So that was sort of a strike against him. It was Ken Whiting that pulled a lot of strings to get him in to the Navy. And he was in anti-submarine warfare and a PC. And that kind of a boat goes back and forth across the entrance to a harbor to make, they called it a ping line, because every time had something to do with radar. When there wasn't anything there, it pinged. These things went down. And if it didn't ping, they dropped one of these things that they called ash cans, depth charges they were, off the end of the stern of the boat. And so he was at all these island hopping things in the Pacific. He was at Guadalcanal and Saipan and Tarawa and Eniwetok and Guam and all of those. And they'd come in the day after the main invasion and then run the ping line so that the submarines couldn't get in there. You can't imagine, we didn't have anything on the home front. It was cold, our houses were cold because we had no fuel, kept our houses at 60. And you see, I made myself a house coat out of a blanket. I figured I can't, I might as well make a snappy looking thing to wear if I'm going to be cold. We had no gas for our cars. It was rationed. The tires were rationed. It was the coldest winters, and we had chains on our tires, and we'd put the chains on. Like, I lived on Avermore Drive up at the top of Mountain Avenue, and we'd put the chains on the cars, but when you got down to Palmer Avenue, there was no more snow on the street, you see. So you didn't want to ruin your tires. As Mother once said, I feel like I'm riding over my relatives. So you'd have to you'd pull over and stop, and get a parking space, and take the chains off. And then finally somebody invented, the chains would go all the way around the wheel. Then somebody invented chains that, because the wheel would have little things where there were holes. These things you just put them through there, and you put like 3 on. That did the trick usually. But they were easier to, you just unbuckle them and stuff, instead of having this business of putting these things. Before, you had to lay the chain out and then you roll the car over it and everything. It was a big deal. When we went to parties, for instance, we'd walk to the yacht club. And I was dating Hunter Megan in those days. He would take the train to Larchmont Station, and I'd walk down to the Larchmont Station and meet him, and then we'd walk to the party at the club.
Oh my gosh.
And then coming home, though, it was late, and so he had to walk me all the way to Avermore Drive and then go back down. And a lot of the time we took buses and things because we didn't want to use our gas. And also, don't forget that my generation were the children of the veterans of World War I. And we heard our fathers talk about it all the time. And, what a bad war it was and so forth. And there was a lot of, they lost a lot of people in that war. I think that we were imbued with this fierce patriotism about our country, and because the first World War I was really the first time we've had any kind of a war where we really had to go over and fight like a world war. And so I think it wasn't hard for us to feel that after Pearl Harbor, well, that's it. They don't know what they've done. And everybody And even, you know, like my grandmother's generation, they were rolling bandages at churches and stuff. Everybody was doing something.